the sludge after 95% of the water. You can hear.
Oh.
It's turned it into a very clean, called the Class A. The reason I bring all of this as we're switching over is that we have one of these $5 million piece of equipment that's at the treatment facility now, and they're doing a demonstration. Tuesdays, I normally meet with you, some of you, 3 of you, at an invitation to come into the treatment plant and see this process. If you want to come to the 3:30 meeting, please come there.
Tomorrow?
Mayor, we're
Yes,
ready.
we are. Okay, we're live. All right, thank you, Mr. Chan. I appreciate that.
On record.
Okay. City Council of Lincoln City work session, October 19th, 2015, 3:37 p.m. Call to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Williams. Dick Anderson.
Here.
Chester Norakis.
Here.
Wes Ryan.
Here.
Roger Sprague.
Here.
Susan Walke. Here. Kip Ward.
Here. All right, thank you. We're here to see a presentation on vacation rental dwellings. Mr. Chandler.
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's been some time in the making, actually many years in the making, and a little bit of time that I've been able to put into this since I've come. Just to kind of bring us up to date, as you recall, we held a meeting towards the end of August in which we talked about vacation rental dwellings, and I reported back on some of the information that I had learned from the community meetings, the neighborhood meetings that we held, and had received some direction from you on how to proceed and ultimately how to put together some ordinances if you should choose to do so, or to modify ordinances. Today, our intent and our purpose of this is to bring back some of these options for you so that if you are ready to proceed forward with this, you can. With all of the options that are available to you, one of those options is to do nothing and just operate under our existing. We will talk about what that means and how we would go forward if that was the option that you choose. In all of these recommend or suggestions that we have for you today, we have tried to keep them simple. We've tried to keep them easy to understand, easy to enforce. And then the other thing we've tried to do is that where we can to make changes within our policies and practices and not necessarily the changes to the ordinances. So in other words, we're trying to do the most amount with the minimum to our policies, practices, and ordinances. Part of what I have been doing with our staff is reading and trying to understand what brought us to this point. As you have been through, the discussions have been polarizing at times, and as I have studied the history of what has happened in Lincoln City and tried to understand that, there are some things that become a little bit that I just wanted to lead with. What you have on this chart that's up on the board is the VRD, or the vacation rental dwelling, and I'll refer to it as VRD after this. Its growth since 1987, which is how far our record VRDs. Between 1980s, first of all, there's just under 500 VRDs in the city. Okay, and that constitutes about 10% of the housing stock of the city.
20%?
I think our housing stock's at about 5,000 to 6,000, so it's about 10%.
10%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Between 1987 and through 2003, the city averaged or issued 4 VRD licenses per year. Beginning in 2004, that jumped to about 20 per year. 76% of all of the VRDs that we have in the city have come within the last 11 years. We've also seen a change in the nature of those. Our ordinances were built under the idea, thank you, were built under the idea that VRDs are a second home, which are rented to help offset the costs of mortgages and so forth. For the last few years, what we are seeing more and more of is that they are investment properties, not second homes, and that has had an effect on the city, has had an effect on the neighborhood. With that, also, there has been the VRDs are the equivalent of 1,636 rooms. It's the lodging capacity that has been added to the city through the VRDs.
I'm sorry, one more time with that number?
Okay. Is that better? Okay. The VRDs have a total of 1,636
Thank you.
rooms, which is part of our lodging capacity for the city. In addition, the VRDs have had a substantial financial impact on the city, both for the economics of the city itself and then the city's own accounts and coffers. It's estimated that 25%, or a little more than $15 million, of the total gross room rental fees that are paid per year come through the VRDs. In 2014, we had a little more than $62 million that was spent on the gross room rentals, and as I mentioned, about 25% of that came through the VRDs. The estimated transient room tax that will come to the city for fiscal year 2016 is $5,860,000, and so at 25%, about $1.4 million of that can be attributed to the vacation rental dwellings. Okay.
Did you mean 2016 or 2015?
Fiscal year 2015-16, the year we're in. Yeah.
Okay.
This map, as you see in front of you, shows the locations of the VRDs. The yellow area is residential areas. The area that's up on this area here is Roads End. And let me take a step back a little. Well, no, actually, I don't want to do that. This area is Roads End. The area in yellow is residential property. The area in green is either commercial or it is some public property. Most of the VRDs are located in residential areas, okay? And that also has a significant impact. The differences between the VRDs and the hotels is that hotels are in commercial areas. And so when you're looking, and so because the VRDs are in a residential areas, they are bringing commercial elements into the residential zones. That includes increased traffic and congestion, increased parking problems, noise, rotating guests in and out of the neighborhood, and so forth. Things that you would normally see with a hotel, you're seeing also now with VRDs in the residential problem, or residential areas. There is also the changing nature of neighborhoods. There is a general rule of thumb of zoning that whatever is the best economical feature of a zone or permitted use of a zone, that's what will become in that zone. And so if VRDs are the best economical use over time, areas would become more and more vacation rental dwellings as its predominant feature of a neighborhood. Just as an example, we can see from this that we've had one rezoning of about 7 acres of property. You have another one that is before the Planning Commission, and I know of a third one that is now being considered or being considered to apply for the vacation rental zone, which would make those areas exclusively vacation rental properties. So there is a changing nature to the neighborhoods that comes with that. Now, with that background, there's two things that are absolutely important and critical to understand, and the first is you cannot overstate the importance of vacation rental dwellings have had on our local economy. The second is that you cannot overstate the effect that VRDs have had on neighborhoods. And much of the polarizing language we have had has come from the extremes on that, where we would either open it all the way up to vacation rental dwellings with no limitations versus completely shutting them down. What you're left with is to decide what is the best option and how to go forward with that. Okay. The proposals that we have today are really in three groups. The first is enforcement of the detrimental effects of VRDs in a residential neighborhood. The second is some time limitation. And the third are just two or three other miscellaneous items that didn't fit well into those two categories.
Mr. Chandler, if I could interrupt.
Yes, sir.
How would you prefer to move forward with this? Do you want to just get through it all, then we talk, or would you like us to?
Anytime you have a question, feel free to ask a question. It's a work meeting, which means although we're in a formal setting, it's really meant for more give and take between you and me and you and me.
Okay.
And any of the other staff.
Then I guess I'm going to start right off with detrimental effects.
Yes, sir.
Can you define that for me? Can you give me something that says these things have occurred? We're making a claim here.
Yes, sir.
And so you have some police records or something from sanitation or from the compliance officer?
Sure.
Okay.
We have information that has come through our planning department on all of these different things. One is parking issues. We have those both within the parking on the property and parking off of the property. We've had complaints about noise that have come through. We've had complaints, and this came out quite loud and clear on the effects of the rotating nature of the guests that are in those and how that affects a neighborhood. There has been increased traffic on all of those. We have had, over the years, complaints and concerns about those.
These are registered complaints that we could pull up on public records?
Sure.
Okay.
They're not only
anecdotal.
They're not only registered. They're not only those, but they also come from the meetings that I held over the summer. But yes, they're both.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. As we look at enforcement, there's really 5 areas that we wanted to present some ideas to you for your discussion. The first is a call center. The second is an additional employee. The third is parking. The fourth is education. And the fifth is penalties. Under our current policies, this has worked sometimes, but not overly well all the time. And that's that when somebody has a complaint, sometimes they will call the management company or the local contact who operates the VRD. Sometimes they will call the police department, and sometimes they will call the city office, specifically Timothy Novak, who is our VRD enforcement agent. Because of that, we don't always know what is taking place. Hopefully, the management companies, and for a large part of it, they are taking care of issues, and it doesn't even need to come to us. Often, when it comes to us, people have hit a point of frustration. But under our current policy, it states the police shall make 3 attempts to contact the local contact. The owner is responsible to respond within a timely manner, and then the owner must report back within 20 days of the complaint as to how it was solved. As the staff and I began looking at this, one of the things that we felt was needed to improve the enforcement was a call center where there's one number. For example, if you are living in a neighborhood that has 3 VRDs that are surrounding you within a couple hundred feet of your home, you'll have 3 separate phone numbers to call. And if you need something if you have a complaint or something needs to be resolved. Under the proposal of a call center, there would be 1 phone number. In our case, we were proposing that would be the police department. Let me see. Let me go next one. That would be the police dispatch non-emergency number. They would receive a call. They're manned 24 hours a day, so it wouldn't matter what time of the day the call came in. They would then email the local contact to tell them the complaint that they have received. They would also copy that email to our community development office, who then would be able to respond to make sure that that is taken care of. As part of enforcement, we do like the idea that the management companies take care of things more than the city having to fix things. And so that's why the email goes to the management company. They then respond, and our staff then would, within a 24-hour period, make sure that that complaint has been verified and has been resolved by the management company. Any questions on that idea of a call center?
Yeah, so, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
how does that guarantee that a person that's a resident has an incident happening, that it's going to be responded to not within a reasonable amount of time, because everyone's got an idea, different idea, reasonable. We need to fix a number onto that and find a way that it's verified that it was fixed. There's really three answers to that. One is that the first and kind of more long-term is that it gives the ability of the city to track better the performance of the management companies. And that gets reflected as we go into the penalty phases for these types of violations. The second is that right now we have 20 days to resolve that, to make sure it was resolved. In this case, we would be looking within a 24-hour period. Now, there is one part of it that if you're interested in defining more than just a timely period, in my research, some of the communities that I looked at said within a half an hour or within an hour, or I think the shortest period I saw was within 20 minutes they'd have to resolve the issue. Now, these would be for things like nuisance related. These would be trash, parking, things like that. Anything that would be a police matter would be dispatched to the police officers. That would be a life and safety issue, and they would then have to go and they would then go and respond to it as they would any other police call. So for the management company, these would be the things that we generally look at as a nuisance type of violation. So one thing we can do, if you are interested, is we can define the time frame even more as to how long it should take them to resolve the problem. Now, one of the difficulties in doing that is that really ups your staff and could increase the amount of staffing levels you would need to make sure it gets done within a shorter period of time. Another proposal before you, we would verify it and make sure it got done within a 24-hour period. If we're requiring the management company or the local contact to do that on a quicker basis, that may also require us to verify it and make sure it's been done on a quicker basis as well, which could create more demand on your staff. So if it's a noise matter, then it gets referred to the police, correct? A partying matter?
A noise party type of matter would go to the police department, yes, sir. Okay. All right. The next item that we, any questions on this before I move to the next slide? Okay. The next few items that we looked at, one was the hiring of additional employees. Again, we have one employee that works for the VRD enforcement, and of course he works 40 hours a week. There are those off times in which he is not working. One of the concerns that was expressed during our meetings, and one that I have heard from some of you in my meetings with you, is that our residents don't want to be the police. They don't want to have to call when there is a problem. They would prefer having the city more proactive in seeking out where those problems are. That would require some additional staffing. Specifically, we looked at the idea that it would require additional staffing over the weekends, so that we have people in
evening hours.
Is it, I'm sorry to interrupt, is it not possible to change that one position to cover weekends? Instead of being a Monday through Friday job, it could be a Wednesday through Sunday?
You could, but you're still looking at just 8 hours a day.
I understand, but 8 hours on Saturday or Friday night and Saturday night is different than, I mean, if we're talking about when incidents occur.
Yes, you could do that.
Okay.
Certainly you can do that. The cost of an additional employee, which means would give you an additional 40 hours a week of coverage, would be between $80,000 to $85,000 when you include the salary and the benefits associated with that. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay.
If the position is for evenings, weekends, is that added pay, if that's what the position is?
You mean if we just did the one position? No, it would be the same salary, but the one thing I would want to do on this before we make that kind of change is to have a further discussion with you on the other duties that this employee has, because it's not just limited to VRDs. There's other work that he does as well, and so changing the hours could also affect that as well. But right now his work hours go through Saturday. They're Tuesday through Saturday.
And my concern is just, as a restaurant owner, if I don't have customers at 3 o'clock on a Monday, I don't staff it. So how many VRD complaints are we getting at Monday at 3 p.m.?
Well, as I mentioned, we would need to bring back for you a greater analysis of his duties, because they go beyond just VRDs as well.
And I understand that.
What you'd be really... I went through school as a meter maid. That's how I got through school. And it was a great job, and I loved it. Got hit by a couple of cars on a couple of occasions. That's really what you're essentially looking at, is somebody who's going to be out patrolling and specifically looking for the nuisance types of violations, parking, trash, and so forth. Okay?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
This was a very common request from the meetings you held this summer, was it not?
It was.
And Councilor Walke, were you asking about double time or time and a half?
Yeah.
That's what I thought, Mr. Chandler. She was concerned with time and a half or double time on weekends?
You mean if you just increased the one employee so they were working more than 40 hours?
Or alternated their...
If you had a position that was evenings and weekends, would that require
time and a half?
Oh, no, not as long as it is still within 40 hours a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chandler, not to regress, I'm sorry. Is it regress or degress? I don't know. Not to digress. So you have a neighborhood, and this is a common complaint. It's just full of VRD cars. Everywhere they look, there's VRD cars. How is your enforcement going to help that neighbor that's upset with that? Tell me the process that goes through so that person has that remedied in a fixed amount of time.
Some of what I'm going to discuss also will include your penalties. Okay, and so I'm going to jump a little bit ahead on the penalties. Right now, for our parking is done through our licensing of the VRDs, okay, and that restricts their on-street parking. It also restricts the stacking of vehicles of more than two in a driveway. And that penalty is considered to be a Class A civil infraction, which means that if you are if someone is hit with that, that is up to $1,000 fine for each day that that violation occurs. If you are looking more at the nuisance types of violations, you're really looking into a different type of a penalty. You're looking at more of a parking penalty, where it may not be the owner that is being fined. It would be a car that is being ticketed. Okay? And so that would require us to do a little restructuring on our licensing provisions. But if you have someone that is out doing patrol and looking for these issues and they're seeing parking violations, then they would be issuing tickets to the cars in the same way you have others. Now, we're going to come a little bit to this, to the next section when we talk about parking, because one of the things that is important to understand is that we don't have a VRD parking problem. We have a citywide parking problem, of which VRDs are one contributor to that problem. And so when you start talking about parking, you could be going well beyond just the VRD guests themselves.
Well, and is my problem with this, even this discussion about VRD cars. If someone can tell me how they can determine which car
we'll be coming to that.
I'd like to know.
Yeah, we'll be coming to that a little bit in the discussion when we get to parking. But as we look at this type of, I'll call it meter-maid enforcement, you're really going to be looking at more of the ticketing of the individuals than simply a call to the management company asking them to take care of the problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions before we go to the next part of this discussion? Okay, parking. I'm not changing slides on this one. As I mentioned, as our staff was looking at this and discussing the VRDs and how to go forward, one of the questions that we started asking ourselves is this a VRD parking problem, or do we have a citywide parking problem? And the answer is that we have a citywide parking problem, of which the VRDs are one contributor. They're not the only contributors to that problem. And so we began to look at how do we begin to deal with a citywide parking issues, and also in how do we deal with the VRDs as a component of that parking issue. And the one obvious and most long-term answer to that is that we need more parking. Whether that is the city constructing it, whether that's private parking being constructed, whether that's finding extra capacity and making arrangements so that the VRD owners can use that. This is the expensive part of the solution, and it may be the most difficult because the city just simply needs more parking. And as we looked at that, it's more parking in either smaller lots and closer to where the need is. So in other words, for example, if you have a small area of just 6 or 8 parking stalls near an area where there's VRDs, that would be a much greater value than a parking area of 40 or 50 stalls that are a long ways away from where the need is. Okay, so part of what we are suggesting today, and this is more long-term, is that we begin looking at how do we increase parking for the city.
Mr. Mayor?
Sir.
Sir? One of the issues with the parking is that we don't allow stacking in private driveways of vehicles. We could remove that limitation, which would get more vehicles off the street. However, I would not want to do that without indicating that you can't impact a sidewalk or street or whatever with the stacking.
That is one of our proposals, so let me jump right to that.
Could you define stacking for the people who might be talking about?
Right now, in any kind of a driveway, you will have one car that's parked behind another one, okay? In our licensing of VRDs, we allow, that's 2 stacked. In our licensing now, we only allow 2 stacks. We don't allow a third car, even if there is space in the driveway for a third car. And so one of the proposals that we're bringing forward to you today is to change that to allow the stacking as long as it does not impede on on the right-of-way, on the sidewalk, on traffic flow, or anything like that, as long as it stays on the private property of the driveway. And it's important to note that we do not prohibit stacking of cars in your own personal driveway. You can stack 3 and 4 if you have that much room. We only do that with the VRDs. And so one way to gain some parking is to amend our ordinance to allow that to take place. Again, as long as it does not impede upon any kind of traffic from pedestrians, bikes, vehicles, right-of-way, so forth. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
On the topic of, trying to create some parking areas, if I remember correctly from my days on the Planning Commission, we have an ordinance or a provision within the residential zones that you cannot have a parking lot. So that's something that would have to be changed, I believe.
There's a couple of things that and again, this is more long-term, and so we're not necessarily looking to the solutions today, but there's a couple of other things that we ought to consider. Not only that, but we also ought to look at the idea of loosening our regulations on paved parking lots and use a more road-based gravel. The reason for that is there's always an opportunity that we could lease property that's undeveloped, use it as a parking lot until such time as the owner of it decides that the lease is over and he wants to build something on it, and therefore the parking surface would be a road-based surface rather than an asphalt surface, so that as it gets returned back to that property owner, they're not stuck with a sea of asphalt. And so as we look at going forward with the idea of creating more parking, that's one of the options. That's one of the things that we should discuss. Another one is that we should also consider, in helping to pay for this, the costs associated with this, some sort of validation. For example, a management company could purchase the rights to use some of these parking to help offset our costs. Again, I look at an example. If my family came into town, I have 5 brothers and sisters. There are very few VRDs that could and we come from all different parts of the country. There would be very few VRDs that could handle the number of vehicles that we would bring in. And so we would be left with, where do we park? And currently there are not very many places to park. If we're able to create additional parking through some sort of validation system, then whoever we rent a VRD would also be able to provide us some additional parking if necessary. Okay. Another suggestion we wanted to bring before you, this is actually a couple of suggestions on this, and that is to look at the space in front of the house of the VRD. In any residential property, right now there's no limitation on where you can park as long as you're not blocking the right-of-way, as long as you're not impeding traffic. So I can park my car in front of my home, I can park my car in front of my neighbor's home, and anywhere I would like along the street without any problems. The restrictions that we have on parking is meant to protect some of the neighbors from having multiple cars up and down the driveway. But there is the property that's right in front of the VRD house itself. And that could either be used as an additional parking space if there's enough room and it doesn't encroach on the flow of traffic, or it could be used as more of a short-term loading zone type of a thing where they could be parked for a few hours but not a permanent parking. Now, another option, and if you're looking at restricting one of the challenges that we have with enforcement is that you cannot tell the difference between a VRD vehicle and a residential vehicle, which makes it virtually impossible, unless those vehicles are registered somehow where we get to see the license numbers, it makes it virtually impossible for us to really enforce if there is a VRD guest is violating the provisions of the parking licensing. One option that is available, you're seeing these in urban areas quite a bit now, where parking is limited, small driveways, similar to what we have here, is parking by permits, where for certain hours of the day, the parking is restricted only to those who have a permit, and those who have a permit are the residents in there. So in other words, often what you're seeing in those is that they allow parking during the day, but they don't allow parking in the evening after 6 o'clock, after such a time, then that parking is restricted to just the residents that live there. So that is also an option that could be available. There's also an option to look at of creating additional loading zones where you may have an opportunity for that. It might not be right in front of the house, but it might be a vacant lot that's close by. This would require signage to be posted. This would require the issuing of permits. This would also require really a greater enforcement of the meter maid, of the parking enforcement type of an employee. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chandler, what are the challenges of adding just a time limit that someone can park? For example, put up signs that say, and those are already up anchored, for example, 3 or 4 hour parking, and enforce it. The local people that have their own driveways and just have the meter maid mark their tires, and if they're there for over 4 hours or 3 hours, then you give them a citation.
You could certainly do that. That would not be difficult. The only thing to consider in that is that that would also affect those that live in the neighborhood as well as those that are VRD owners.
Well, in addition to that, you know, if you're at home, you have that place that's actually in the public right-of-way that's right in front of your house, that even though it's not really yours, it feels like yours.
Right.
And if you could make that piece permit only, I mean, if you just, that
Sure.
would, that seems to me that would work. I mean, that's where a lot of the frustration comes, is someone's parked right in your space. And most people don't realize that that's not really their space.
Most of the communities that I'm familiar with that do that kind of permitting, it's not as limited to just right in front of your house. It's the neighborhood you live in. You could do that, but it might be a little bit more difficult to say that this is permitted only for right in front of my house, but I'm certain that you could be able to accomplish that if you desired.
Or, yeah, just put a sign that said permit parking only. If you don't have a permit, you can't park there.
That's right.
So would you foresee that, let's say you're going to have out-of-town guests, you're not a vacation rental, but you've got your home, and you've got a family of 5 coming. Do you then have to scurry down to City Hall and get a permit, and each one of them has to display the permit? If they don't have the permit, they get a ticket?
We've actually been thinking not as much with the coming down to City Hall, but working through the local contacts and the management companies to accomplish that.
Okay.
And that would be both in the case of any kind of permitting, whether it's street permitting or it is permitting in a parking lot, whether the city owns the parking lot or there's a lease arrangement of some sort.
Is there any, and I know we're stretching here, but an online technology where that could be done?
I'm certain there is, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on parking? Okay. Before we go any further, let me again jump back to what we really hope to accomplish. From this, we want to be able to begin to prepare the policy changes and the ordinances that will meet your desires to bring you back to you any kind of changes to our whole VRD operation within the city. Of course, that won't be done today, but as we go through things, and we'll come back to those as you go into a little more of your discussion, if you are settling in on some things and giving us some direction to say, yes, we want to do this, or yes, we want, or no, we don't want to do that, that's where we're, in the end, hoping to reach today. Okay, the next thing that we wanted to talk about were an education program. This is one that, again, would not require any changes to the city's ordinances, but would be well, there's one change that we want you to consider, but would be a very helpful tool to us, and that is some sort of a brochure or handout that will be going to the guests, and that will be going to the VRD owners, that will be going to the the neighborhoods that would deal with what the rules are, that they're in a residential area, that the citizens have the right to call the hotline, what the hotline number is, any kind of a curfew or noise curfew that may be there, trash, parking, and so forth. Just a good education brochure that could be a part of that. There is one thing that came up quite a bit in our discussions, and that is our noise curfew is 7 p.m. We would suggest that you consider changing that. That's fairly early in the evening to have a noise curfew.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it 9 p.m., Mr. Chandler?
Then you just turn to the right people. I thought it was 7.
If I remember right, the discussion was, it was enacted at 7, but I believe Mr. Hawker said, well, you know, if you're going to be mowing your lawn or something like that, it would be an exception for that.
There is an exception for domestic tools till 9.
Right, that's what I remember, but not...
Till 9?
Yeah.
But the decibel level was so low, it was just general conversation.
There is one other part that we would like for you to consider in changing. Right now, when a VRD application comes into the city, it's reviewed by our community development staff. They will issue the license and then send a letter out to the neighbors that are within 300 feet, telling them that a license has been issued, and if they would like to appeal it, this is the appeals procedure. We would actually like to add one step before that, and that's to actually send the letters out before the license issued so we can gather input from the neighbors instead of waiting until after the license has been issued.
So are there any criteria that are in place that the residents could offer to deny a VRD?
I'm going to bring Richard Townsend up to answer this question.
I mean, it doesn't do any good to, when you notify them, if their testimony has no effect.
We don't have in the ordinance anymore
I'm sorry,
section.
Richard, I'm sorry, have you introduce yourself through?
You need to give your name.
Okay. Richard Townsend, Planning Director. We don't have in the ordinance anymore there was a sort of a general provision about adverse impact on the neighborhood. There are, most of the standards we have are what we call clear and objective, where, you know, are there the right number of parking spaces and that kind of thing. Presumably we're able to get that right, but you know, people can say we've gotten things wrong, and they certainly can appeal it.
And Ron, do you anticipate the, I'm sorry, were you finished? Okay. Anyway, Ron, while they're talking, did you anticipate the mailing costs being included, coming from the licensing fee when they apply?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just want to add, thanks to Timothy, one thing that is good from getting out information beforehand is if people have concerns, they can express them to us, and we can add conditions to the approval that address concerns if it's, you know, if it's a reasonable concern that relate to the standards that we have, and so we can condition things in a way that would could result in reducing the impact.
Could you give an example of that, even of a hypothetical?
Well, noise is always one. You know, like somebody's got a hot tub and it's right next to somebody's bedroom, and we can condition it and say, you know, can't use the hot tub after 10 p.m. or something like that.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So someone applies for the VRD license, and the neighbors object, and so you refuse to issue a license. Then what? They can appeal, or what?
Yeah, no matter what the decision is, it can be appealed. If you grant it or deny it, it can be appealed.
The Planning Commission makes that decision then? Or is that our decision?
If it's the VRD land use, then it goes to the Planning Commission, ultimately it could go to the City Council and up to Lou, but if it's the license, the VRD license, then that gets appealed to the VRD License Appeal Board, which the Planning Commission fills that role.
Right.
But now, if they don't already have a license, it wouldn't go to the VRD License Appeal Board then, right? That's only if you already have a license, isn't it? Or is that not?
Or if it's denied or whatever. I'm not sure that I understand the question. If they've already got the license.
I was thinking about renewal. If there's been problems and then there's...
Yeah, if in renewal we say there's a problem and we're going to condition it or whatever, then that can be appealed. Or we can, if we say there's been problems and we're not going to issue a license anymore, we're not going to renew, that can be appealed.
And that goes to the VRD Review Board. Okay.
Right.
So, and if I think what you said initially was, though, that if I'm a new applicant and you send out the notices to the neighbors, and then a couple say, well, here, I don't want this, and then the planning determines we don't want it either, is that subject to appeal?
Yes, that can be appealed,
Okay.
yeah. And we don't issue permits or licenses based on somebody saying, I don't want it.
I was being
I just want to make that clear. It's not just an arbitrary thing.
Right.
Two neighbors said they didn't want us, so we're not going to issue it. We can't do that.
I understand.
It's got to be based on the criteria.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on that item?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chandler, if we could go back up to the education program. In that pamphlet, I'd like to see us include on our website the address of the VRD, the number of guests, property manager, and the owner's contact information.
Great.
That would be in addition to the brochure.
Okay. I got the website, the owner's contact information, the management company. I think you had one more, didn't you?
Address of the VRD, number of guests, property manager, and owner's contact information.
Okay.
Well, if I could, just why would we want to put the number of guests in it? Because it's for the guests to have. They'll be there.
So the neighbor who sees 15 people going into this place that's licensed for 6 can report a violation.
Well, I understand, but I'm thinking but the brochure would be just on site, right?
No, what we're thinking of is a brochure that's broad enough that it would be both for guests, neighbors, anybody who comes
You
into
would post
town.
it outside on the property, is what you're saying?
When a license is issued, it would be mailed to the neighbors, as we do now, along with that. So it would be available. It would be broad enough that it's available to everybody.
You're saying the limit in the house, not just each time someone visits, they've got to fill it out.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, I was misunderstood. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I have a suggestion, and that is that the brochure be mailed out by the property manager at the time that reservations are made ahead of time, so that they have time to review that and know that coming in, what the rules and regs are. Okay. And if each house, I suppose, has different limits and what have you, so they could have 2, with one, the city brochure, and second, the site limitations.
I can say that's a good idea. I can also say that the web pages and the printed material that I have seen from our existing local contacts include much of that material. You know, it includes the limitations on vehicles, the limitations on guests when you go to register, but certainly this could be that as well.
Well, I think there needs to be 2 numbers, two numbers too. There's the heads and beds versus people in the building.
Yes.
Because I've seen it where people will show up, you've got a limit of, say, 8 in the beds, but their friends show up. And well, then at what point have you reached capacity of the house? But they're not going to spend the night.
Okay. Okay.
I know that a lot of the management companies currently send that information out. I don't know that people read it. I don't think people pay attention to it.
It's like the tsunami maps.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that's frustrating for people that run motels and or work for them is that we almost all send out confirmation letters telling the date, time, the amount of money, it's for how many people, so on and so forth, what kind of a room you have. And you'll be surprised that over half of the people show up, they have no clue. They're usually, or I mean, sometimes they're on the wrong date. They don't know what they're paying. They don't know what the rules are because they didn't bother to read it. You know, and we said that most firms are now sending it by email and or snail mail, and it's frustrating because people do not pay attention. You can mail them 400 pounds of information, or you cannot make them read it, and that is the biggest issue. Is that all of this is well and good, but if you cannot get the people to read it, you just waste a whole lot of time and money to accomplish nothing.
Maybe we need a YouTube video.
Yeah. I think one of the issues, from my standpoint, one of the issues is that the property management company should be doing as diligent a work as they can, and I'm sure that they all do, just like the motels do, of getting their guests informed of the rules. That you cannot have Humpty Dumpty cars, you cannot have Humpty Dumpty people. It is for these dates. And I think that you have to kind of trust the property management people to a certain degree. The asking for neighbor input, I was going to keep my mouth shut, but originally the ordinance did call for neighbor input. I think it was 200 feet surrounding that prior to anything being issued. That was the way it was originally set up, and it was for that reason, is to find out what kind of issues we had to deal with in a neighborhood before something was issued. And somewhere along the line, that went away, and it's too bad, because it was a good check and balance system right off the get-go, because the owners could get together with their neighbors and work out some of these issues before it became an issue. So I would highly recommend that we do that sort of thing. But and this brochure is very nice, and I think it's a good idea. I would, if the city wants to do something like that, I think I would make a basic one available, and people can write in their confirmation, with their confirmation number of the management companies and mail it out with their information to their guests. I think that would be very helpful. But are people going to read it? Probably not.
And I don't really want to muddy the waters tonight. Maybe we can talk about it later.
Yeah.
An education component for the owners.
Yeah.
Something has to be some kind of component that says, here's your obligations as a vacation rental dwelling owner.
In some of my research, some communities in the United States have actually developed a training program that all new VRD owners are required to take.
I agree with that.
At this point, we do not have that proposal before you, but it certainly is something that we can bring back if it's your desire.
I wanted to step in one more time.
Please.
When you were talking about parking and in the neighborhoods, and there was a discussion about marking tires and so on, or enforcing parking. One of the issues is that our police are busy enough now, they are not going to really mess with too many parking issues unless they get a lot of complaints. And we have discussed hiring parking enforcement officers before, but it's awfully expensive. Because you have to have some sort of a dedicated vehicle. I mean, you can't just have one. You got to have two or three, because you've got rotating shifts, and you have a bunch of other things that go along with it. So it's a good idea, but you have to look at the effectiveness of it as opposed to the cost of it. Is it really worth hiring, going to that measure?
Okay.
And I'm going to try to limit my questions because I know we're running behind. So
that's fine. And the next thing we wanted to bring up was penalties. This is for non-accessory use penalties. Okay, so this is not for time limitation. Right now, we don't make a distinction in our penalties between time limitation and a nuisance. As I mentioned, it's considered to be a Class A infraction, which is a $1,000 fine, and each day that the problem persists is a separate violation. We've identified 3 options that for you to consider. One is to leave it as is, no changes. The second are to do lesser fines in lesser amounts, as we've already discussed, like a parking citation. And then the third, we heard quite a bit from VRD owners and management companies that they said, we like Newports. And so Newports is a 3 strikes and you're out, which states, and this is a quote from Newports, for the first violation within a 12-month period, the city shall issue a written warning. For the second violation within a 12-month period, the city shall suspend the owner's license for 30 days. And for a third violation within a 12-month period, the city shall revoke the owner's license. I talked with their city manager and said, how has that worked? And they said, no, we've never done it. So Newport has not actually tried to use this enforcement, but like I said, we heard quite a bit, and mostly from the VRD owners, that they like that provision. That's the provision of Newport's.
And again, Mr. Mayor,
yes,
like I said, that the last one, the 3 strikes, is a very good thing from a management company's perspective. Because if you are a good management company and you take care of things, you know, you're having to pay a price essentially for the bad operators. And the 3 strikes and you're out gets rid of the bad operators fairly fast if you actually enforce it. And so then you're going to be left with the good management companies who pay attention and want to follow the rules and will try to make sure that their guests follow the rules as best as possible. So it's kind of a win-win in that respect. And I like that concept. We originally had a thing similar in the original ordinance that, you know, if you, I don't remember how it was, but there was a period of or so many complaints, and your license went to a review, and if that did not turn out favorable, your license would get pulled. And we did pull a couple at the very front of the process, and it made believers out of people. So I think it's a good process, and I like that. You know, throwing Class A and Class B violation stuff around just, I think, is a wrong attitude. But I like that. 3 strikes and you're out. You know, pretty simple. Please.
I would like to add to that they be bona fide complaints.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Because you can have a couple of neighbors get together and just torture you, and so we need to have a, I don't even know what word verification that wouldn't be.
That would
some type of process that validated the complaints, and also I think that there should be something in there that, I mean, people can't control their guest behavior. You try to, and to some extent that you can. Never mind.
Okay. Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Chandler, I'm concerned that we're going to need an ordinance change if we would decide on 3 strikes and you're out.
You would.
And my fear is that we're going to get Measure 49 claims as a result of that.
I'm going to turn to our city attorney to answer that question.
The Lincoln City Code already provides that we can initiate revocation of your vacation rental license and land use approval for violations specified in the land use standards. So we already have revocation as a remedy. It just simply hasn't been used. What Mr. Chandler is suggesting is more of a demand or requirement or an order to staff. Basically, staff, after the 3rd one, you shall initiate revocation. So it's really an ordinance not directing the VRD owners. It's really directing your staff to use the available remedy and revoke the approval.
Well, I'm looking at vacation rental dwelling criteria, 17.80.050, and it says that if the same offense continues to occur or a second offense occurs at any time during the 12-month period, the permit shall be subject to revocation. Basically, that's 2 strikes and you're out.
And there's another reference also in the enforcement section to any violation, and has a reference to the criterion, which includes the accessory use limit.
So we are safe in regarding Measure 49 if we were to approve this?
I don't think that it would, it's an enforcement mechanism. It's not really restricting the residential use of single-family residential property. So I think it would be difficult to make a Measure 49 claim. Not that someone might not try it, but I think we have enough existing language there that I think you're really just, again, directing your staff to do something that your code already really provides for. And it may be that the violations Mr. Chandler's talking about is the minor kind of nuisance, not some of them aren't minor, but 3 strikes on the nuisance impacts, as opposed to some other criterion like a transfer violation or an accessory use violation.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Sir.
Mr. Chandler, is it possible under penalty areas here, I see, lesser fines, so it drove the question, can the revenue from fines be used to fund your enforcement officers? The meter maid, the night guy.
I don't know of anything that would specifically prohibit you from doing that. But more commonly, the funds would simply go into the general fund, and then they would be used to fund. And that's where an enforcement officer would come out of, is the general fund.
Right. Okay. So that could be a revenue source to help add to the enforcement.
Certainly.
Mr. Mayor, the other question I guess I have is, if I'm hearing you right, these are nuisance areas, trash, parking.
Exactly.
So in a 12-month period, worst case scenario, my trash can gets raccoonized once a quarter. I've been informed. I'm a VRD owner, property manager. I've been informed. I've cleaned it up. I've put a latch over it. But these guys are pesky, and they gang up on me. The dogs get involved too. So you're telling me after 3 trash mishaps, I lose my license?
You could. Under this provision, you could. That's why I think one of the things to consider would be more of the lesser fine types of things. Enough that they hurt, but not enough that somebody would lose their license because of trash. But under this provision, yes, you could.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I remembered what I forgot. On one hand, we've told them that there's a complaint, they're notified, they have to respond in 30 minutes. Their reward for being that diligent shouldn't be, that's strike 1. If we need to tie it to they didn't respond or they didn't fix the complaint, then it counts against them. You can't control people's behavior no matter how hard you try, but you can control your process that you have in place to remedy when they do tip their garbage over or whatever.
Or a nice wind gust.
Yeah. I mean, Dick hit it right on the head.
Good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I think that might be kind of hard to put in writing, though. I like the idea, but I'm trying to figure out how would you put that in writing so that there's got to be a cutoff place where they did or did not respond, or how many days, and so on and so forth.
Councilman, this is where we would put our ingenuity of our attorney and our planning director together to figure out how to do that.
Mr. Mayor, and I hate to go back, but I'll be like Mr. Ward, and yeah, I'm digressing. I like the education program. The one element on here that I think is most important and yet underutilized is your first open bullet that says welcome.
Right.
I would like to think that this is an opportunity for the city to welcome guests who are new to our community as visitors and maybe expand. This seems like an opportunity that we should have a list of things to do. I mean, market ourselves rather than be so restrictive of, we're a rules-heavy community. It's kind of the sense when I read this, and I know there are brochure people that are better.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would agree, but I think, honestly, that'd be something you'd bring the chamber in on, because I'll guarantee you they're not approaching vacation rentals as they would a hotel with their information.
Okay. Okay. Are we ready to move to the next part?
Indeed.
So that takes care of the enforcement discussion, and we'll come back to that if you would like to. But the next part moves us really into time limitations. Our ordinances essentially have four provisions that deal with time limitations for vacation rental dwellings. The first is the definition of accessory use. The second is a prior existing use clause. The third are penalties. And the fourth are VR zones, or the VR zone, and we'll deal with these. So we'll start with accessory use. When you're looking at accessory use, you have a couple of options. One is you can do nothing and enforce the current ordinance. Now, 77% of our VRDs do not have a time limitation on their licenses. Okay, and accessory use is defined as incidental and subordinate to the main use of the property. Okay, and that, of course, as you know, has been a great source of contention for the city on what that actually means. What does accessory use? What is the time that's associated with this? We heard many, many times in our meetings that needs to be better defined. Right now, if you do nothing, our community director has determined going forward and feels justified in this determination that accessory use means 90 days. So if you do nothing, then what we will do is simply enforce 90 days. Okay? On all of those except those that have a number that is part of their application or part of their license. Okay?
Let me get this straight. I'm sorry. We have 77% that don't have it.
A number. That's right.
So they would immediately go to 90?
As we look forward to enforcement of a time limitation, we would get the word out that if you don't do anything, the number right now that we have that our planning director has come up with, and he and I are comfortable with this, is 90 days.
You mean if we don't do anything, or the VRT?
You don't do anything to change the ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't change the ordinances and we just go forward with what we have, then as we look to enforce, the staff looks to enforce accessory use, it will be 90 days, which is what, again, our planning director has researched, studied out, and he feels comfortable and can justify that.
In an R1 zone, though.
In an R1 zone, yeah. Of course, if it's in a commercial zone, it has a number associated with it, then it would be different. Okay? All right. So, one of the things that we heard quite a bit from was that it is the proper role of the city council to determine what that number is and not the staff. Now, as I mentioned, we have determined that just by the fact that we have to determine that. We're getting applications in. So what we have before you is a couple of changes for you to consider, as you look at trying to better define what accessory use is. And let's see. I'm jumping ahead to 2 slides. The items that you see in red would be the proposed language changes to the ordinance. The items that the question marks that you see in blue are the ones that we would be looking to you to fill in those blanks. So currently, as I mentioned, our ordinance states a VRD is allowed as an accessory use in a residential zone and a permitted use in a commercial zone, provided the VRD meets the applicable standards of this chapter and obtains a license under Chapter 5.14 of our code. This first section, 2A, adds a provision that says, except as otherwise provided, and we'll touch base on that in a few minutes. And then it also defines what is a residential zone and what is a commercial zone. So, for example, residential zones are R1, RR, RM, NP, and NCR zones. Commercial is GC, RC, TVC, OP, MSH. That sounds like the federal government, doesn't it? And you can see what these other ones are. But, and so those 2 provisions. It's the next section, B, which is really the most significant. In our discussions that we had, as we looked at what we can do legally, what we need to be able to defend our ordinances and so forth, one of the conclusions that we came to is it's better to define it by what it's not than what it is. Okay, so what you'll see on this one is, item B, incidental and subordinate accessory VRD use is not commercial VRD use. Commercial VRD operation is use of a dwelling or VRD purposes for more than, you fill in the blank, VRD rental nights in a calendar year. Commercial use does not include use authorized by conditional use, non-conforming use, or vested right land use approvals, or through the safe harbor. And that last sentence we'll come back to in a minute and explain that. So, again, what you're looking at defining is that if we use that 90 days and say you are comfortable with that, or you leave that up for us to put that number in, then anything above 90 days would be considered a commercial use, and therefore it would not be. You cannot use that in our zone as an accessory use. If it's 90 days or below, or whatever number you plug into there, then it is considered an accessory use for the residential zone. Now, before you ask any questions or have any comments, it's important to go through the next parts of these so that you see it as a package. Okay? The next part is that we have 2 provisions in our ordinance for prior existing use, and we are proposing that you add a 3rd provision into that. Currently, the 2 provisions, one deals with conditional use. It states any vacation rental dwelling accessory use approved by the city under the conditional use standard as in effect prior to November 21st, 2007, may continue as a non-conforming use after such date. We normally call those grandfather clauses. Our ordinance calls them prior existing use. The second one is a vacation rental dwelling accessory use that is not a conditional use and was approved by the city prior to November 21st, 2007, may continue until such time as the license holder sells, transfers, or conveys the property. Under our proposals, those 2 will stay. So people that, VRD owners that are licensed prior to November 21st, 2007 would fall under that. Now, recognizing that that over the last 10 years especially, that people have been making financial decisions based upon our current ordinance and based upon either our actions or inactions, we felt that we wanted to propose to you another prior existing use provision that we're calling a safe harbor provision. And that would simply state this: subject to the limitations and provisions of this section, a vacation rental dwelling located in a residential zone, and then it identifies the zones, that prior to, that date needs to be filled in, obtain a vacation rental dwelling land use approval and a vacation rental dwelling license, and such approvals remain valid, may operate up to so many nights per year under a vacation rental dwelling safe harbor. The safe harbor terminates upon the sale or transfer of the property as defined in the code that's cited there. Now, the safe harbor is not a vested right determination or a determination that the subject, that the vacation rental dwelling is a legal non-conforming use with a guaranteed amount of usage. The allowance was developed by us and proposed to you today in recognition that owners have come to rely upon a certain level of income based upon our current ordinance and our actions and or inactions over the past several years. Now, the thing that we're also proposing in this, and we need to develop this a little bit more to bring back to you if you're interested in this, is that there does need to be a mechanism whereby this provision is authorized by the city. Okay. If you recall, last year when an ordinance was developed, we had an opt-in program where you would get up to 180 days if you opt into it. If you don't opt into it, then it would automatically go back to a lesser number. That caused an awful lot of grief. As I particularly looked at this provision, I recognize the value of this provision because people have come to rely upon it. So if you're not going to open accessory use to 365 days of rental, there is still a need for something like this safe harbor. Now, what we discussed in this was that we don't want to make it difficult for people to do things. And so the language that we'll bring back to you, if you are comfortable with this, is that someone doesn't have to do anything to receive this safe harbor. They would have to opt out if they don't. Okay? So in other words, if you have a license prior to the date that goes into this ordinance, then you would have 180, last year they used 180 days, so that's kind of stuck in my mind, but please don't, it's up to you on what you want to do. But they would be able to, a VRD license operator would be able to rent up to a certain number of days that would exceed what the accessory use is defined as, and they would automatically get it unless they opted out of it. And for whatever reason, they would choose on that. Okay? All right. Let's see. Okay. The final thing that I wanted to bring into this before you go into discussions are penalties. And for this one, we are not recommending that you change the penalties for accessory use. And the reason is that our current ordinance fits quite well with a penalty assessed for going over the number of days that you're permitted. Anytime we are doing an accessory use, it's going to require an audit. It's going to have to be after the fact. A certain number of days, of course, have to go through the year before you can even begin to look at it. And so if it's 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever it is, once those days get passed, then we can then start looking at collecting the information, guest registers, and proceeding with enforcement of this provision. So we are not recommending changes to the penalties as they are associated with accessory use, and that is as a Class A civil infraction as defined by the city. Okay. Any questions?
Councilor Walkie?
No,
What's that?
the next page answered my question.
Oh, okay, great.
Be patient.
Do you want to, Mayor, would you like me to go over the vacation rental zone and then have the full package on time limitations?
Sure, why don't we do that?
Okay, we'll get the whole thing
here.
then. All right. Under the vacation rental zone that we have, properties can be rented or can be rezoned to be the vacation rental zone. And there are 5 criteria that someone has to be able to meet in order to receive that designation. They include that the area is in a discrete geographic area where tourist accommodations would not disrupt established residential neighborhoods. The area must be in close proximity to the community's attractions and recreation uses. The area must be served with a full complement of public facilities and services, including specifically sewer. The area is in proximity to commercial zones and/or existing multifamily residential zones, and the area serves as a transition between commercial zone and established single-family residential zones. As you know, we have one area in town that has already received this zone. We have another application that is in process. So the options that are available is first to do nothing and leave it as is and just move forward and deal with those. We're already finding the Planning Commission is asking some questions about additional criteria that we wanted to bring to your attention today. One of those is that properties should be contiguous, so that if there are multiple properties that are being requested to rezone, they are contiguous properties. The second is they also provide additional information such as traffic studies and impact studies for the area. Those are also being considered. The third option you have is to repeal it. If you repeal it, then only commercial zones would be, if you appeal it and keep an accessory use definition, then only commercial zones would be allowed 365 days rental and multiple ownership. And the fourth one is to add it to the comprehensive plan. Now, I need to take just a few minutes and discuss this, and I'm going to ask Richard to come up here again to help me answer any questions. The cities across the country, tens of thousands of them, normally have 2 planning documents, 2 planning maps. One is the master plan map, and the other is the zoning map, and they are different maps. The master plan map is prescriptive. It tells you what areas you can develop in certain ways, no matter what the property is in it. For example, you may live in an area that's zoned as residential, but it's master planned as to be industrial. And eventually, one day, it would become industrial. So that when people come in and they're looking to buy property in the area, they can see where the residential areas are, where the commercial, and so forth. That is a very common planning document. The other one is the zoning map, and that's a descriptive map. It tells you what is on the ground right now. So this area is a residential area. This area is a commercial area. No matter what the master plan map says, the zoning ordinance says what it is. Okay, so if I'm buying property, I come in and I look and I see that this piece of property is zoned residential. I then look at the master plan and say that, oh, the property right next to it is slated to become industrial. That would affect what kind of decision I would make. In our community, the master plan and the zoning ordinance are the same document. We don't have a prescriptive document. So when applications come in to rezone the property, they're actually asking to redo the master plan and to rezone the property. Now, one of the questions I asked Richard was, is this an Oregon thing or is this a Lincoln City thing? And it's a Lincoln City thing. More predominant throughout the country is to have a master plan that is different from the zoning map, the master plan map from the zoning map. So one of the things that we'd like for you to consider, I initially, when I first started discussing with this, wasn't sure that this is very different from what we have done in the past. Wasn't sure it would get much legs, with much interest. But the more we've talked about it, the more interest that there's been enough interest that I felt that we needed to bring it up. And that is that as we are now beginning the process of updating our comprehensive plan, our master plan map, that we look at the idea of identifying areas that would become vacation rental zones, no matter what they're zoned now. That way, as somebody comes in and they look at the property, they know that in this area, it one day can be rezoned as vacation rental property, and another area cannot. Again, it is a very typical planning procedure that's just a little bit different from what we do. And so one of the things that we wanted to present to you tonight and have you to consider is that as we go forward with the master plan, is this something that you want to, at least in the case of the vacation rental areas, consider as part of your master planning process? Okay, that gets me through everything, all the time limitations. So with all of that, any questions, discussions that you have for us?
Well, can you, you'd mentioned contiguous property. Property must be contiguous in a VR zone. Can you give me some insight into that?
Yeah, there is the potential under our current ordinance that you would have one lot that could be zoned as a VR property. Normally, you would not see that happen. Matter of fact, you could run into a problem with spot zoning. And so you could have little spots of VR zones throughout the area. If it's contiguous, then you would be dealing with larger areas that you would see a section, similar to the 7 acres that you guys already rezoned as a VR zone. You would see sections instead of just a small piece of property.
And that would be the citizen-initiated.
That would be a citizen-initiated. Yeah, one of the things just that the mayor brings up, we did not find a single person that liked city-initiated zoning. Okay, so it would be citizen-initiated.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chandler, maybe I should say this, would it be reasonable to add a minimum number of dwellings that would have to be in the VR zone in order to qualify for a VR zone?
I think I'm going to turn to our planner for that.
I think you could have a minimum area if there's, if you have a rational basis for it. And that can be justified, I think, in terms of not wanting things sort of peppered through the whole city, but wanting an entire area which might be affected to come in at once or something.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, because if I can see where you may have 2 or 3 houses side by side, or they would have to be contiguous according to this one criteria. But you could have 3, and that would become a VR zone. That really is spot zoning, in my opinion. And I think there needs to be a minimum number to qualify it as not being spot zoned.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but I have to leave.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm almost right behind you here. I'm glad you're back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Anderson, you seem on the cusp of a comment.
I'm just thinking of all the exceptions, and I think, again, remembering maps and where do you draw maps and lines and stuff, and I can envision, across the street, a corner, or, something, making application to so that the VR zone continues to head west or east or north or south, and all there was a street in between. Depending on how that corner lot is situated or something like that, I guess I wouldn't want to preclude that by demanding that, 5 lots have to, a minimum of 5 lots or 10 lots or something. So I hear what you're saying, Councilor Sprague, but I guess I would want to leave enough room, and I guess looking at the criteria and leaving it up to Planning Commission, there's 7 people that are going to be looking at it and talking it through. I have some comfort in them of deciding whether a 1 lot makes sense based on where it's located.
When I think of zoning, I think of large areas, usually. And that's, if you look at how Lincoln City is zoned, for the most part, we have pretty large areas. But just to have a small little area in a big city, it doesn't make sense to me to zone that for a vacation rental dwelling in an R1 zone.
But I guess I didn't make my point. If you have a land mass that's already zoned VR.
Right.
And across the street, I mean, right now, we have commercial zone that's half blocks. And, that seems kind of silly. But, why wouldn't, if you're next to a street in between, you're next to a VR zone, and across the street, for whatever reason, one lot, two lots, because of how the land and street are configured, it makes ideal sense that they ought to be part of, or since you're so close to a VR zone, why shouldn't they be?
I have no problem with that because it's contiguous to the same zone. But I'm talking about if you've got an R1 and right in the middle of that, you want to put a VR, and it's 3 lots or 2 lots. I just don't buy that. But if it's contiguous to a VR zone, I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. First, using what we've had tonight for the oceanfront rentals as they stand, how often could they rent those?
Okay, so if you were to do nothing, okay, and just leave the ordinances as is, unless they have a number associated with their license, or they are in a VR zone or a commercial zone, they would be limited to 90 days.
And have you thought about the effect on the VRD industry if their main bread and butter was cut in half?
Yes, it would have a huge effect on it. And that's why we're also including the prior existing use provision in this as well, so that if you limit the number by accessory use, recognizing the fact that that current VRD owners and companies have grown accustomed to a certain level of rental, we are proposing the prior existing use provision or the safe harbor provision to accommodate that.
And do we have any...
It does not exist in our current ordinance.
Yes. Do we have any indication of how well that would be received?
I don't, as far as what that number would be, although, again, last year you used a number of 180 days. The only opposition I ever heard to that number was more of, well, it was the opting in part of it, but the other one really came from the fact that there should be no limitation. Not the fact, but the position that there should be no limitation. I did not really hear from very many people that 180 days was too small.
I think that, the oceanfront area is the vacation rental bread and butter, and I'd think real hard before I'd start pulling teeth there, because it'll have consequences that just we shouldn't have. So, my opinion. And my second opinion, sorry, I'm just hogging my time right now.
It's all yours.
VR zones would tend to spread. One of the things that we found out was that when we went through the process where we, what was it called, when we all...
The consensus group.
The consensus group. One of the surprises that we had in the consensus group was that people that didn't own a VRD, never planned to own a VRD, wanted to have their property zoned so it could be a VRD. And the reason is that there was a perceived value there that they didn't want to pass on. And when you set up a VR zone, I think it lends itself to that. Regardless of how people operate in their own self-interest, and sometimes it's the hell with the neighborhood. So to be able to have people just initiate their own zoning, I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, and we would run into unintended consequences. So that's done.
Well, and that's kind of, where I land, having followed this for years now. And I don't mean any offense by this, but I think we're trying to be the smartest guys in the room. We are looking at every possible nuance and how we can change it and how we can tweak it and how we can offend and not offend. And we get rid of 2 words and this goes away. We get rid of accessory use and we don't have this discussion. We don't have to worry about any of this. We won't spend another year fighting this battle. We won't have to put staff through it night after night or meeting after meeting and just to try to find this little niche that's going to work for everybody. Whereas we follow Newport's lead. Hey, it's a 9-page document. I'm looking at a front-page article that says their TRT money's off the hook. Now, is that because of it? I'm going to say part of it. I've seen the stats from the realtors that we're seeing an 8% decrease in the sale prices of homes right now on the west side of the highway since we've had this discussion. Yet the east side is still doing fine. This will be a battle that will never stop as long as we continue to chase this accessory use tail. That's my 2 cents on it. And I want to say I so appreciate the way you've laid this out, Ron. It is emotionless and a very emotional thing. And it's clear and concise, and I think you've represented the opinions of many of the citizens well. But again, that's my thought. This is not going away as long as we try to enforce an accessory use, because you say 180, okay, prove to me you did 180. Prove to me you didn't do 200. Which little group's going to sit there and watch those things? The parking, all these things that would just keep dividing us should go away. And that's my thought on it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
With that philosophy over time, I can see where residential neighborhoods would be totally taken over by VRDs.
And, I can appreciate that, the thought, but there's an economic reality that there's a point where you couldn't rent it if you tried. There's a point where you reach saturation that says, okay, there's 300, 400, 500, exactly how many can you possibly rent? And then there's also on the east side, nobody wants to rent up by Taft High School. Nobody wants a VRD up there. So there's going to be a market-driven limit. And there's also going to be a market-driven limit on how many days I can rent. If there's 3 houses, I can rent it at 365. If there's 100, I'm not going to be able to do that. It's just, the economics of it don't bear that up. But I understand what you're saying.
That doesn't stop people from thinking that by buying a house and turning it into a VRD in an R1 zone, that they're not going to make money.
And I sure understand that, but they won't.
And one other thing I think that we need to take into consideration is multiple ownership. And when I say that, I mean that an owner has more than one dwelling or more than one VRD that he owns or she owns in an R1 zone. I think we should limit that to 1 VRD in an R1 zone. If you want to have 5 in a commercial zone, I think that's fine. But in an R1 zone, that's a business. That's no longer an accessory use type rental. That's a business.
We have not proposed to change that provision. So in an R1 zone, you would not be able to own more than 1 VRD.
We don't have that in the ordinance now, do we?
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
We do.
It's in there now?
It is. And we have not proposed to change
We
it.
added that with the ones that were overturned.
And see, I don't believe so. But I would take the opposite side on that, say, as a franchisee. I have to prove to the parent company that I can handle 1 store. Then when I've proven that over a year-long period, I'm allowed 2. And then if I've proven that over a year-long period, I'm allowed 4.
That doesn't...
Well, it does make sense in that we want good owners. If I have 1 guy who can run 5 well as opposed to 1 well and 4 poorly, we have a known commodity. It makes sense to allow that person who's doing the job right to continue doing the job right.
I disagree. Totally disagree. And the reason is that the reason for VRDs and accessory use, as has been explained, is that people were buying the homes initially to have a place to retire in someday in the future, and in order to be able to supplement a little bit of income to offset the cost of the mortgage, that they would rent it out. But then what's happened over time is this has become a commercial business, and it's all taking place in R1 zones, and I think we need to limit that.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Appicello, we've got changes to we've got proposed language on page 7 and page 9. And with that, if we were to accept that language, could we effectively defend against Measure 49 claims?
If we haven't filled in any numbers yet. Yes, I believe that Measure 49 applies to restricting residential use of single-family residential property. Our position has always been that a vacation rental use is a commercial use, and we relied upon the City of Cannon Beach case some 30 years ago in the findings that the council adopted. That said, that doesn't mean you will not get claims.
I understand. Thank you. On page 12, regarding the VR zone, Mr. Chandler, it strikes me that if we maintain the VR zone, that we're going to further dilute the residential zone. We're going to threaten it further with more commercial operations. Therefore, I would not, I would repeal it if it were my choice. One more question, please. Mr. Townsend, do we currently require VRD applicants to get an accessory use permit?
They're required to get land use approval, which in a residential zone is basically it's saying an accessory use land use approval. They're also required to get a VRD license and an occupational tax permit.
No accessory use permit as such?
No, not something that says solely this is an accessory use. It's when you get your land use approval in a residential zone, it says you're approved for VRD, and it is an accessory use. When we say it in there several times, just to make it clear, and as Mr. Chandler pointed out, where someone's asking for more than 90 days or no number of days, what I've been doing is limiting it to 90. If they ask for fewer numbers, then that's the number that they get, the number lower than 90.
Thank you.
And we put an explicit condition in saying that. So.
Good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
And I understand I've come late to the party, but as I recall, there was an election in May where the voters overwhelmingly turned back some suggested ordinances or ordinances that were in place to, I guess, what's now referred to as the older ones or the current ones before the past administration put on some ordinances. And they said, go back to that. So I guess I'm a little bit wondering why this discussion, because I hear a lot of noise about honoring the elected, those citizens who voted and made a stand. And I don't remember in the ballot measure that it said tweak anything. It just said throw out this stuff about 180 days and 30 days and everything.
That is certainly an option that's available to you, is to do nothing and go forward with the ordinances that you have in place today.
So that was my question, Mr. Chandler. When you allude to the do nothing, the explanation would be this is what would occur. Because right. I'm not sure everybody knew what they were voting for, and so here was an opportunity to clarify for them. But it just seems a little hypocritical to be changing or even talking about changing an ordinance, when you just had a vote in May, and let her ride. Because I too attended, Mr. Chandler, some of your community rooms, meetings, and I heard enforcement. revert back, just enforcement, and live with it.
Well, I don't think it's hypocritical. Having spoken to many of the people who crafted that referendum, I can tell you that I'm not going to speak exactly for them because I don't represent them, other than as their mayor. That it was a time-sensitive thing that had to be cranked out. And I know, having spoken to them, many would have said, if we'd had some more time and maybe a little more money to craft it properly, we would have addressed these issues. I'm sure we'll hear from them in the coming months. What we're discussing now is more along the lines of what they thought, with the exception of the accessory use. It was a long process. That was a lot of years going through a lot of different changes and permutations of this rule to a point where I think heads were spinning. Literally. We couldn't explain it to a single person. When we got to the vote, I could barely explain the vote to anybody. It was almost incomprehensible, the way it was written. So it's a discussion worth continuing, in my opinion. I don't think the vote said, let's just go to what we've got and call it 90 days and be done with it. I'll guarantee you that was not. And if you believe that, I would be more and more to say, then let's put it on the ballot. Let's have a ballot. Let's have a vote. And let's just put this in the voters' hands. Let's be done with it. We don't have to continue this debate.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't disagree with you, but that's one of the, you have to live with what you get, vote. You put it on and threw out some work that had gone on for years. Mm-hmm. And the voters voted for it. So to then turn around and say, well, that's not really what they voted for, or that's not what they meant, or something, I don't know, because I can only speak for myself. I read the ballot, and
I understand.
It was pretty cut and dry. It was short, sweet, throw it out and live with the old. And
I understand your perspective on that, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
One of the reasons the current ordinance has survived is it doesn't ever define accessory use, and we also didn't do any enforcement. So if you want to go with the old and put an accessory use and enforce it, I think it would be quite a different creature than it is today.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I was so impressed with Councilor Ryan's letter to us a few months back, where, he was struggling with this and with the citizen who'd addressed it. And he said, when we crafted this is not what we intended. We never intended it to get to this level. It was intended so that we could collect the taxes. That was it, just so that people would pay their taxes. And he says, I couldn't possibly support this now. This is not where we wanted to go when we originally crafted this. And I have to, go along with Councilor Ward here that, okay, if we're going to go back, then let's go back to what it was. We'll determine the numbers, leave us alone, and we'll be fine. And enforce the rules that you got. I'm done. I've only got a couple minutes left anyway.
Well, I guess, Council, the last question I have is, how would you like us to proceed? Do you want us to bring this back in another work meeting? Do you want us to start drafting ordinances for you to consider? Multiple different ones, all the way from not going to do anything to the different languages? How would you like us to proceed? Do you just simply need more time to mull it over and then decide how to go forward?
We want to cut the baby in two.
I'm glad my babies are grown.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
We've seen a whole heck of a lot of stuff today, and to make a decision of any kind tonight, I think would be wrong. I think we need time to mull it over.
Well, I agree, and this is, But I would like to see a piece of this that does discuss repealing the accessory use ordinance and, what that would mean to the city as far as manpower needs and things like that. Because I think there would be a significant impact on time spent on these things.
Well, the thing that ultimately what we'll need is some direction from you on how you would like to proceed, whether that is preparing one thing for you to vote upon on any of these different topics, or that is preparing options for you to consider, whether it's the actual language in the ordinance. So as you think it over, ultimately what we need to do is, the only thing we don't need to do is that if you don't want to do anything, you say we don't want to do anything, and the current ordinances stay in effect and we enforce them as the current ordinances. If there is something that you want to do, then whether that's one thing or multiple things, just let us know and we'll begin preparing those documents for you.
And if I'm allowed to ask for individual requests, then I would also like to see a cost of a ballot to put this to the people. If there's some kind of analysis you can give us, what would that cost, when could it be available, and the like?
Your Honor, as this is a work session, we're not taking any action today, so I think at your next regular meeting, anybody could take any motion to offer the direction that manager is seeking.
Would you like this on your next agenda? Next Monday?
For City Council?
For City Council?
No. No, I think we need another one of these.
Okay.
We may need a few more of these. Okay. I mean, this deserves really objective scrutiny, and we still haven't solved the problem. Realistically, you've got a winner loser. If we take accessory use down to whatever, 30 days or something, then you'll have a lot of the VRD companies feel like losers, and we'll lose a lot of income. If we eliminate the accessory use, the neighborhoods lose. So somewhere in there has to be a balance, but the tipping point isn't 90 days. I don't know where it is, because at 90 days everybody loses. So trying to find this thing is really, really difficult to find that fairness.
Let me make a suggestion then. We'll put together some agendas for further discussion on this. If there are questions that you have individually that you would like us to address, if you could get those questions to us before the meeting, then we can make sure we do the study and our homework to be able to address those thoroughly during that meeting. So any questions that you have, just send them to us, email to us, bring them in, whatever you'd like, and then we can make sure we incorporate those into the discussion and be able to answer those.
And I would like to have a discussion briefly, too, about the 90 days. It doesn't have to be now, but while we're going through this process, whether that 90 days is sufficient. I would like to be able to talk about that.
The beginning point of that is that we'll have Richard explain more as to how he came to that 90 days.
Okay. Anyone else? Great discussion. Thank you again so much, Ron, for all your work. Thank you, Mr. Townsend. And with that, we are adjourned.
So, actually, this is an advertised work session. Can we make sure we